Hey everyone, and welcome to Talk ETFs, our new weekly video series where we sit down with experts in the ETF industry and beyond. I'm Sumit Roy, Senior Analyst here at ETF.com, and joining me today is Sal Gilbertie, CEO of Teucrium, an agriculture-focused ETF issuer. Thanks for joining us, Sal.
Good to be here.
Sal, what a roller coaster ride it's been when it comes to the agriculture markets this year. First, we saw Russia invade Ukraine and that knocked off supplies. Then we saw a deal between Russia, Turkey, and the UN, and that brought supplies back online. Where do we stand in terms of supply and demand today? And which commodities in particular have been impacted the most by all the crazy geopolitical events of this year?
That's a big question. If we start with the war, wheat obviously is the number one impacted commodity. Corn's probably a close second because Ukraine is a very large exporter of corn, and in fact, the number one exporter of corn to China. And then fertilizers. Russia is the number one exporter of fertilizer, and it affected more the price than the supply. So what's happened up to this point, the year's almost over here, is that we had the war. We had an initial price spike in grains and fertilizers in particular, and in energy. That fluff is kind of off. People have the supply demand situation is more clear. People understand that there's enough of everything. They also understand that the uncertainty is keeping prices elevated, particularly in the wheat markets. Now, wheat's interesting because Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, and it is not illegal to buy anything from Russia in terms of wheat and fertilizer in particular, but it is difficult to it's a place of last resort because the Black Sea is their export channel. They have to get through the straits near Turkey. And we have, of course, the deal with Ukraine to keep Ukraine exporting. Russia has done everything it can to slow down Ukraine exports. Even the UN brokered deal, Russia slows everything down. The 3 days that Russia backed out had record exports from Ukraine since the war started. Russia is intentionally slowing everything down. They this month, December, they have bombed the port of Odessa, which is Ukraine's main exporting port, and they've disabled the port almost in its entirety. So Russia's doing everything it can to cripple Ukraine exports. This is not a joke. Russia is in this to win. They are in this to harm and even erase Ukraine from the world. They want it to be part of Russia. They are exporting wheat. They have 4 bushels of wheat for every 1 bushel Ukraine has to export. They're going to export. Russia, is going to export much more than a 4-to-1 ratio because they're hampering Ukraine exports as best they can.
Got it. And then in terms of prices, Sal, I took a look at the charts for corn, wheat, and soybeans earlier today, and it looks like they got very close to record highs earlier in 2022. Since then, they've pulled back as you would expect, but they're still very elevated compared to where they've been over the past several years. Why is that?
Now, since the UN brokered deal, the prices kind of are back towards where they were when the war started. Remember, the world's been using more grains than it's been producing for several years. And depending on which specific grain you look at, it's been 3 years or 5 years or 6 years, depending on the country or the global balance sheet that you're looking at. But either way, the world is using more grain by and large than it produces. That's why grain prices are elevated. You saw up until about 2 years ago, we saw grain prices flat, trading at or near their cost of production around the globe for 8 consecutive years. They basically, well, let me put it this way. For 8 consecutive years, we produced more grain than we used around the world. It took 2 years to come off the old highs from 2012. And then we flatlined traded essentially from 2014 through 2020. 2020, things started to change where, again, we started using more grains than we produced. So we saw grains kind of inching off their lows, having some fairly good price appreciation. And then the war in February of this year, that, of course, took everything to its highs. But things are more normalized now in that there's no panic that there won't be enough. People know that there's enough. We need to go back to plenty. We always say there's a difference between enough and plenty. We have enough. We're heading back towards plenty.